The purpose of this recording is to review strategies that you can follow to incorporate direct quotations and evidence from King's letter from Birmingham jail into the essay you are writing throughout Module 3. We will look at strategies for incorporating direct quotes and also how to format the paragraph itself. As a reminder, the prompt that we are responding to in Module 3 asks us, what stylistic elements does King use to influence his readers? After reading and analyzing Letter from Birmingham Jail, write an essay in which you answer the question and analyze structure and language in his text, providing 3 or more examples to illustrate and clarify your analysis. What conclusion can you draw about the power of this text? The key portion of this prompt is in asking us to analyze the structure and language of the text, which are both stylistic elements that allows us to answer the question, and to provide 3 or more examples to illustrate and clarify the analysis. The 3 or more examples are going to come in the form of the direct quotations that we will incorporate into our discussion. So when you are pulling text evidence from in any response, there are 3 basic ways that this can be done. You can, number 1, summarize the information, paraphrase the information, or provide a direct quotation. When you summarize, you are putting the main broad ideas of a text in your own words. A summary generally encompasses large portions of text, sometimes the work as a whole. For example, if we talked about this fairy tale Cinderella, a summary statement for that particular story could be, in Cinderella, a beautiful, kind girl is mistreated by her stepmother. Through the help of her animal friends and the fairy godmother, she attends a ball, falls in love with the prince, and lives happily ever after. The summary statement is the story in a nutshell. The paraphrase, on the other hand, is putting a specific sentence or several sentences in your own words. It's focusing on one specific portion of the text. So if we looked at the scene in Cinderella where the fairy godmother transforms her dress into something beautiful, creates the carriage from the pumpkin, a paraphrase of that particular scene could be, Cinderella looked at her fairy godmother in disbelief as her new beautiful dress magically appeared. If we were to look at the story as it was originally written, it will be phrased differently. This is a retelling of the story, that particular section, in our own words. A direct quotation, on the other hand, is using the words of an author specifically and directly from the text. For example, Cinderella explains to her animal friends, a dream is a wish your heart makes when you're fast asleep. Notice that in the direct quote we've referenced the speaker, and we've also included a signal phrase to let you know that the information following comes directly from this speaker. So it's important to remember when you're looking at that direct quotation, it can't just be stuck into the paragraph. We shouldn't see discussion, quotation marks, the information from the text, and then you move on to another point. The direct quotation must be incorporated into your discussion, and it should flow in the context of your paper. This means the quote should be introduced, embedded, documented, or explained. It needs to be relevant, and it needs to be significant in the context of your overall discussion. So let's look at an example paragraph. Remember that when you're writing your body paragraphs, a good strategy to help you organize your information is to look at the ACE strategy. Inside each paragraph, you should, number 1, answer the question, provide a topic sentence at the top of the paragraph. You should then C, cite evidence from the text to support your answer. This is where you would include that direct quotation. You should also then E, explain or elaborate on and answer that evidence. Remember, we don't want to just stick a quotation in the middle of our paragraph. We have to explain it. We have to make it connect. We have to make it relevant to our discussion as a whole. The C and the E portions will be repeated multiple times to give you a fully developed paragraph. So if we look at this example, please note that this is a body paragraph sample that deals with the structure. Remember, the purpose of our essay is to analyze the structure and language in King's letter from Birmingham jail. So the paragraph that we're looking at on the screen discusses structure. However, it focuses on King's "I have a dream" speech. This paragraph is for example purposes only. Please make sure that your specific discussion centers on King's letter from Birmingham jail. So if we look at the example, notice we have some color coding, and the color coding is to help us identify different portions of the ACE strategy. We start at the top in red. Red is the answer portion. The yellow portions of the response are the C citation portions. Notice that the citations are always followed by green, which is the E, explanation and elaboration of the evidence. So let's read the body paragraph together. It tells us, King's message of hope echoes throughout his speech through his use of parallel structure and repetition. In several sections of the speech, King purposefully repeats keywords or phrases to emphasize significant portions of his message and unify ideas. When he declares, "And so even though we face the difficulties of today and tomorrow, I still have a dream," King begins a series of paragraphs which emphasize the hope he has for the future of the United States. By first establishing his point and then beginning the following 8 paragraphs with "I have a dream," the parallel structure connects this section of the text to emphasize the theme of hope for unity. This idea is further developed through the call to "Let Freedom Ring" across the country. King calls for freedom in all areas of the country and specifically mentions each geographical area in an effort to encourage freedom and unity across the country. Through the repetition of keywords and phrases and parallel structure, King uses the structure and organization of his ideas to further develop and communicate his message of freedom and hope. So if we look at the paragraph, we notice that the first section answers the question. It's always our goal to answer the question in one complete sentence. This particular writer felt that we needed 2 sentences to first set up the idea that we're using parallel structure and repetition, but then also to establish how that repetition and parallel structure contributes to the work as a whole. If you need more than 1 sentence for the answer portion, it's a good idea to limit that to 2 sentences. So once we've established that this paragraph is going to discuss parallel structure and repetition, notice we have an example, a direct quote from the text, which is followed by explanation of how that quote, or what that quote actually accomplishes. We then have another citation from the text with additional explanation. So this is a great example of how your body paragraph should be formatted. So when we look at the direct quotations, there are several specific types of quotations that are required in your body paragraphs. So we're going to look at a few examples of what that type of direct quotation should look like. The first type we're going to explore is a direct quotation introduced with a complete sentence and a colon. So if we look at this sample, it tells us, King instills hope for the future by speaking of faith and brotherhood, colon, quote, With this faith, we will be able to transform the jangling discords of our nation into a beautiful symphony of brotherhood. Notice that prior to the quote, we have a complete thought that we could easily put a period here and end this thought. Instead of a period, however, we've included a colon to signal we have a complete thought before and we're drawing attention to the information afterwards, and we've included quotation marks around the direct quote. So this is a direct quote introduced with a complete sentence and a colon. The next example that's required in your body paragraphs is a direct quote introduced with a signaling phrase and a comma. Let's look at the example. King emphasizes the injustice of segregation and calls for action by proclaiming, comma, quote, "We are not satisfied." Notice this particular example includes 2 signaling phrases. Notice we have named the speaker at the beginning of the sentence. So the signaling phrases are connecting the speaker to the words that have been spoken. It's required that you include at least 1 direct quotation introduced with a signaling phrase and a comma in your own body paragraphs. Additionally, you should also include a direct quotation introduced and explained in 1 sentence. So let's look at the example. When he declares, comma, quote, "And so even though we face the difficulties of today and tomorrow, I still have a dream," comma, quote, King begins a series of paragraphs which emphasize the hope he has for the future of the United States. So in this particular example, we have a signaling phrase. Notice we've named the speaker, we have used our signal phrase declares, included the quote, and then following the quote, we've explained the significance. This is a direct quote introduced in red and explained in yellow there in one sentence. This is a required direct quotation that must appear in your body paragraphs. It's also important, in addition to direct quotations, that you use paraphrased information in your discussion. You don't want to end up with a paper that is just a string of direct quotes. You want to make sure that you are taking the information and showing that you can process it and that you can paraphrase it and use your own words to explain it. So if we look at this particular example, this is a pretty lengthy section of King's I Have a Dream speech. Notice the key points here. You see the repetition of the words "let freedom ring," and you also can see specific references to different areas of the country. So a paraphrase of this section could read, King calls for freedom in all areas of the country and specifically mentions each geographical area in an effort to encourage freedom and unity across the country. So in a short little blurb here, we have summarized the key ideas of this section of text, and this would function as a paraphrased example. So it's important that you have at least one paraphrased piece of information in your body paragraphs. And the final form of a direct quotation that must appear in your body paragraphs is an embedded quotation. An embedded quotation means that it's going to appear within a sentence. Embedded means it appears. If you think about web pages or videos, graphics, they're embedded in the page. It means it's going to appear within. So if we look at this example, notice it says this idea is further developed through the call to, quote, let freedom ring across the country. So notice that let freedom ring is a small excerpt from a bigger work that we have included within the context of the sentence to help the ideas flow smoothly. Remember, you should include an embedded quotation within your body paragraphs. Just some general ideas for punctuation guidelines when you're including a direct quote. Number one, make sure you use a colon if you have a complete sentence that comes before your quotation. For example, here we have Simon and Garfunkel's use of a simile creates a dreary image. That's a complete thought. So now we have a colon and now the quotation. If you use a comma, or use a comma if you utilize a signaling phrase to introduce your quotation, make sure the comma appears before the quotation begins. And it's also good to note that if a quotation comes at the end of a sentence, you want to place the end punctuation, usually a period, within the quotation marks. So it should appear inside the quotation marks. So for 3.09, you're going to submit your completed body paragraphs in the worksheet titled Body Paragraphs Worksheet. That can be located on the last page of the lesson. Remember, when writing your body paragraphs, you must include a direct quotation introduced with a complete sentence and a colon, a direct quotation introduced with a signaling phrase and a comma, a direct quotation introduced and explained in one sentence, a paraphrased example, and an embedded quotation. These are required components of your body paragraph. If you have questions or concerns or would like more information and examples, please feel free to contact your English instructor for more information. We are happy